Will the Supreme Court overturn the right to same-sex marriage next? Let's talk about it. I want you to understand this, like really understand this. So to get there, we need to do a little bit of a law lesson, so just bear with me here. Okay, so the right to same-sex marriage is what we call a substantive due process right. Substantive due process rights are rights that originate from the 5th and the 14th Amendments. See, the 5th and the 14th Amendments prohibit the government from depriving you of life, liberty, and property without due process. So over time, the court has questioned, well, what does it actually mean in practice to be entitled to life and liberty? And that's where substantive due process rights were born. So the court has said you have a right to enter contracts, a right to utilize contraception, a right to same-sex marriage, to marry someone of your choosing, and up until recently, a right to bodily autonomy. Now, in 2022, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health. And in that opinion, the court was like, look, in order to be one of these substantive due process rights, the question needs to be whether that right is deeply rooted in our history and tradition, and whether it is essential to this nation's scheme of ordered liberty. In this opinion, the court ruled that the right to an abortion, women's right to bodily autonomy, is not a right that is deeply rooted in our nation's history and tradition. It is not essential to the nation's scheme of ordered liberty, and is therefore not a substantive due process right. Dissent in that case warns us that the majority is not done with its work, because if the question is really whether or not a right is deeply rooted in this nation's history, what would stop the majority from saying that there's no support in American law for a right to contraception or a right to same-sex marriage? In response, the majority was like, oh no, like don't worry about all of the other rights, like abortion's just different. So the dissent is like, okay, so then one of these two things must be true. Either you don't believe your own reasoning, or if you do, then all rights that have no history stretching back to the mid-19th century are insecure and up for grabs. Either the mass of the majority's opinion is hypocrisy, or additional constitutional rights are under threat. It has to be one or the other. Justice Thomas comes in and writes a concurrence. A concurrence is where you agree with the majority opinion. So in this case, he agrees that there's no constitutional right to an abortion, but you write separately because you disagree with the rationale. Here, he was like, yeah, no, I disagree with the majority. I think we should just come after all substantive due process rights. And he explicitly calls out Obergefell. He's like, you know what? I'm just going to say the quiet part out loud. Let's just like burn it all down. So we know that Thomas wants to revisit and likely overturn Obergefell. We know that Roberts and Alito both dissented in the Obergefell case in 2015. So if we assume that these three would overturn Obergefell, they'd need to get 2 more votes to get to a majority, so they'd need to get 2 of the 3 Trump-appointed nominees, Coney Barrett, Gorsuch, or Kavanaugh, and so that they can make a choo-choo train on the expressway to hell. With all that said, it's certainly possible, if not likely, that there are enough votes on this bench to overturn Obergefell. Republicans know this, and they want it to happen, so they're starting to introduce resolutions and laws to bring this question before the court and give them the opportunity that they need to overturn Obergefell. For example, just a few weeks ago, Idaho Republicans introduced this resolution explicitly calling on the court to overturn Obergefell. Now, when I talk about the risks to Obergefell, I'm often met with, oh yeah, that'll never happen, which like cool, thoughtful analysis. But Republicans chipped away at Roe for 50 years. This is sometimes a long process, and they hand-selected a bench specifically to overturn it. To think that they will not do the same to your other rights is to literally ignore everything in front of you, including what the court is telling you. I'm going to pause here. Let me know what questions you have in the comments. I'm the Feminist Lawyer. Follow me if you enjoy being miserable.